Hello, everyone. How are you today? Welcome to the session about how to prevent and recover from burnout. I am really happy today to be joined by my dear friend, Emma Matthiews, who is a burnout and stress specialist. We met in a coaching program and we completely clicked. We both love developing ourselves, helping our clients. With no further ado, I'll bring Emma on. And I'm really happy to share Emma with my community. Welcome, Emma.
Thank you for having me. So excited to be here today. Great to see you again, Caterina.
Fantastic. So the context for this conversation is that I started my Vision Path program 3 weeks ago, which is a 6-week program to define your life and business vision. And in the first week, when I asked people, introduce yourselves in the community, almost 1/3 to a half of the people said, I've recently had a burnout and that triggered me to join a program about my life and business vision. It's an opportunity for me to reset everything. And I think the moment I read all these introductions and all this pattern, I think I went on Messenger and I texted them, Emma, please, can you come over? I'd love for my Vision Path cohort, first and foremost, to hear about you and learn some tips. Also, they're in the tail end of burnout. I think that's when you are ready to change the life and business vision. So that was the context. And with the opportunity we're sharing with the LinkedIn community as well.
Makes a lot of sense. And actually, it makes a lot of sense that people who've really taken burnout seriously would actually be in a program where they're looking at life vision. That actually says to me, you're doing this work right.
So I want to start with that, actually, because that's my interest of the overlap. How often do you see burnout used as a trigger to reevaluate life, business, careers in your work?
Yeah, I see a lot of that, but I guess if we think about the context of how I do this work, I'm naturally going to attract people who want to collapse time on burnout recovery and turn it into a positive because they're reaching out to do some work on it. I think generally in the world, there is still this kind of sense that burnout is this game over thing and you've kind of had your peak years and everything's on the downhill from then. But it's just not the case. Actually, from my own lived experience and the work that I do with clients, obviously we want to prevent burnout, not get there. But if it happens, it can absolutely be the catalyst that leads you to best experiences in life, because it's that opportunity to do a massive reset and really think about what is it that was happening that led to this. Okay, what do I want to do differently going forwards? And the challenge when everything's going okay is that quite often we're really busy, we don't have these bigger picture conversations, and then suddenly you find yourself in later life with regrets because we haven't done that big visionary thinking.
I love it. Let's start with a definition of burnout. I thought you and me know very well what it is. And we've had experience myself. For the people listening, let's start by defining it.
Yeah, and I always start with the official definition. So burnout actually wasn't officially recognised until 2019, which is surprising. The first work around it was actually done in the 1970s, but the World Health Organization in 2019 defined it in terms of it being an occupational phenomenon. So they see it as this sense of you've had stress in the workplace that's not being effectively managed. And they define it as having 3 key symptoms. So the first one is you're exhausted. You're also feeling quite mentally distanced from your job. You might be very negative and cynical, whereas you weren't that before. And you're less effective in what you're doing. So that's the official definition. I was really happy when I saw burnout was officially defined in 2019, because back when I hit burnout in 2017, it wasn't. So it's quite validating. What I have found, though, is just seeing burnout in the context of work is quite a narrow definition. From what I've seen in my practice, it's much more of a reflection of the overall stresses that you've had in life and just how effectively you've been able to complete the cycle on that stress. So home can help you manage stress, or it can add more stress into your stress bucket. And I think there's also this kind of thing with burnout is typically it happens when we're not living in alignment with who we are and what we want from life, which is missing from the official definition.
Absolutely. And that, going back to the relationship between burnout and vision work, my experience, I experienced burnout twice in my life, 10 years apart. And it was actually, I experienced burnout after I had a vision, not before. Like the moment I had a clear vision, the first one was before my MBA. I was like, I want to stop working. I want to go to my MBA. Then what I did wrong, I would say now, is I started resisting my current reality so much because I was so clear on what I wanted, and what I was experiencing was not what I wanted, that resistance is what burnt me out. And then 10 years later, I wanted to leave my corporate life and become an entrepreneur. And the moment I had the clear vision, my current reality, like this time of transition, I was resisting current reality so much that burned me out, that this lack of alignment is what caused both times the burnout for me. And I think that my learning from that is, when you have a clear vision and you're transitioning, resisting reality so hard is exhausting, and it's not the way to go. I like, looking back, I think it was my resistance that created a lot of it.
Yeah, that's super interesting insight. And I see that a lot with my clients. There's almost this, they're all high achievers, high performers, and they've got these goals, but almost this sense of, I don't have the goal right now, leads to this state of lack, and as you called it, resistance. And it can even get to the point that we've achieved the goal, but we've not celebrated it. We're already into the next one, rather than having this balance between kind of, there's things that I desire, but I'm actually grateful for where I am now, appreciating that, taking care of myself as I move towards the desires.
Absolutely. Okay, let's talk a little bit about prevention first. Are there any early signs that we should be looking for? Burnout?
Yeah, and I would say one of the biggest challenges with burnout is the run up to it looks very different for different people, because what's essentially happening is stress is getting stuck in our body, and it's building up, it's becoming chronic. And then when we've been in a state of chronic stress for some time, we reach that crisis point of burnout. So really the trick to prevention is knowing what the earliest signs of stress that's getting stuck in your body looks like for you, and having an effective strategy to complete the cycle on it. So with some people, this looks like very physical symptoms. So I've had clients where their hair started falling out, their nails were breaking. Other people, it was more emotional. So suddenly I noticed I was getting grumpy at the kids, snapping at my husband, just wasn't myself. In my case, when I look back, I think the earliest warning signs that I had were this kind of negative thought patterns of, I'd wake up in the morning with this sense of, is this all there is to life? Is this what it's meant to be about? And then more physical symptoms came in over time. So I had stomach aches that I was getting looked at as a kind of digestive issue. I started to get lots of problems with my shoulders and neck. I was seeing a physio thinking that was something separate. Then I started to get the brain fog. So quite often you'll find that people are going to different medical professionals treating, could be a mental symptom or a physical symptom. And in that picture, it's missed that actually here we have someone who's experiencing chronic stress and is at risk of burnout.
Yeah, absolutely. I experienced similar, like brain. I remember 30 days before my burnout, I was meeting a client, and I'm on the way, and I realized I have forgotten my credit cards, and I was buying the brain, like all this thing, the brain fog, as you said, what's going on, like and then physical symptoms as well. And I was like, that was 30, like this was already, looking back, I was like, oh, I should have realized something was not right there, or I was getting teary or exhausted. Yeah. Are the people, one of the questions from my Vision Path cohort is, are the people who had burnout, are they more likely to burn out in the future? Are there certain characteristics?
Yeah, such a good question. And I would say for people who don't get specialist support and don't make changes, it's almost guaranteed that it's going to happen again. Because typically burnout happens when we've got that perfect storm of, I've got character traits that make me more prone to burnout, and I'm in an environment where there's burnout risk factors. So unless something changes in that picture, it's going to happen again. Versus, say, someone who gets the specialist support to look at that picture, perhaps changes some things around themselves that they decide they want to change. And that work goes very, very deep. We're looking at identity, we're looking at habits, and looks at their environment, home and work, and again, makes some changes, then it's much less likely to happen. And that's the piece that I missed, because I first burnt out in 2017, and then I had a relapse a couple of years later when on paper, everything looked great. But I hadn't noticed that there were patterns in me that were beginning to crop up again. And I had somehow found myself in a similar environment.
So what are the personality characteristics? I remember the first time, and I was 25 in my first burnout. Before that, I had this idea that the people who burn out are weak people. Like, we were born in this, you have to be strong and handle the workload. And then someone else, I was in an environment that was fostering burnout. And I wasn't the first to burn out in that job. And then I saw one of the highest performers burnt out. And I kind of changed the thing that it's not the weak people, it's actually the people that, at least in my experience, they were caring a lot about the quality of their work. They were very ambitious. Tell me a little bit of these beliefs, habits that can lead, that you've seen in common with the people you've worked.
Yeah. And what you've said there is exactly right. I think there are still some societal perceptions. I see some interesting conversations on LinkedIn where it's like, I've had this 60-year career and I never burnt out. People need to toughen up, kind of thing. But actually, the reality is the majority of people who burn out are your highest performers. They have just pushed themselves beyond what a lot of people could physically do. I remember that the psychiatrist that I saw as part of my recovery was just saying, playing back to me the situation, and said most people couldn't have lived and worked in that way for that long. You've physically kind of damaged yourself, pushing beyond what's possible. It's, I guess, if we looked at the athletic world, it would be like the marathon runner who's trying to sprint it without all of the support ecosystem around them, for example. So in terms of traits, it tends to be those people who are really ambitious, high achievers. Perhaps that was modeled to them in childhood. Perhaps they were in a school system that was all about achievement. They sometimes have quite perfectionist tendencies. That can also be part of the picture. People who care about other people's opinions sometimes can be part of the picture. The sense of kind of trying to please people. Often there can also be this sense of, I really care about other people and I'm putting their needs before mine. That's quite often in the mix as well. So lots of different character traits. Also something that we touched on before, this sense of being very goal driven, always living in the future, and actually in that process missing how I am right now, what my needs are. There's not that connection with my needs and meeting those first.
Yeah. And I realized it took me 10 years. Like I was 10 years, I thought I will never have burnout again because I'm really careful, right, on my work-life balance. But as I was preparing to leave corporate and build the business, I was doing a master's, I had 2 kids, I was building a website on the side, I was coaching people in the weekends, and I had a full-time job. Like, it was the situation. I've put on so much on myself in order to make that transition as quick and as secure as possible. And I knew at the time I'm flirting with burnout, but I thought I will just avoid it. Like I had submitted my resignation, I had 3 months ahead. But then when you're flirting and you know you're flirting on that line, anything that happens, that because life happens, can tilt you over. I just wanted to share this in terms of prevention. I went overconfident. It's been over 10 years. I didn't have another burnout. I can manage this 3 months. And it happened after I had submitted my resignation. It was just, if you're in the edge, anything that life throws at you, it's the drop that makes the glass overflow, right?
Yeah, such a good analogy. And I think the reality is, where you are that high achiever, ambitious person, we actually don't want to change that about ourselves, because it leads to a great deal of success. What I have learned is, the more I want to take on, the more that ambitious side of me is coming out, the more I want to scale the business, actually the greater the responsibility I have to take great care of myself. So at the moment, my business is going like that. It's and I've realized, okay, I need this coach in my ecosystem. I'm going to go see this particular type of therapist. These are my non-negotiables. That side of things has had to uptick for everything to balance out.
And is it the amount of work? Is it the type of work, whether you enjoy it or not? Is it the beliefs that you have as you're doing the work? What have you seen as the biggest weight in weighing you down and increasing the risk of burnout?
Yeah, there's lots of factors there. And there was a really great piece of work done by Christina Maslach and another researcher called Michael Leiter. Because prior to that point, everyone thought burnout equals overworking. And they were the first people that kind of got behind the scenes and said, actually, no, there's more to this. So overworking, definitely one of those things. It can also be doing that work that's not in alignment. Perhaps you're living and working in an environment where there's not support. Perhaps it's not psychologically safe to speak up. Perhaps you're actually doing work that's out of alignment with your values. Perhaps you don't feel fairly rewarded as a business owner for the amount of value that you're giving. There can be so many levers. And what typically happens is there is one or more of those factors, alongside some personality traits that make us more at risk. And it kind of all comes together in an environment where that individual at that point in time doesn't have the mindset, work, or the systems around them that help them get that stress that's building out of their body. Stress is a normal part of life, but it becomes a problem when it's getting stuck within us and we're not releasing it. And that's what's happening as we approach burnout.
Okay, so tell me more about prevention. How can make the stress release my body, please?
There's lots of different things that are proven by the science to help. So one of the most effective, this will be no surprises to people, is that physical exercise that for you makes you feel good, that when you're doing it, you can feel the stress melting away. But it also can be things like going to see a funny movie, spending time with friends and family, doing something creative, for example, getting your stress out into a picture, or perhaps you're making pottery. It's those things that actually we know within ourselves, they make us feel better. The challenge is, quite often when you are that ambitious high achiever, that stuff is the first thing you take out of your calendar to fill it up with the other stuff, whether it's someone else's needs or something for the business, something for my employer. And it then becomes counterproductive, because actually the less we're meeting our needs, the more the stress is building up, the less productive we're going to be. So what I have learned is the secret to burnout prevention is being in systems, communities, mentorship, for example, that makes all of those things that help me complete the cycle on stress just a given that it's going to happen. And so particularly in the early stages of recovery, we are rewiring our minds, we're developing new habits, and systems that keep us on track are so helpful, particularly when you start to feel better and perhaps you're doing work that suddenly lights you up and feels very aligned. That's a big risk point. You suddenly think, I don't need these things. This kind of self-care stuff was just all about recovery. Actually, no, these are our high performance habits that are going to enable our high achiever to keep highly achieving for the long term.
Yes. One of the best things I've heard about coaching is an insurance policy. And like I've always been in one-to-one mentorship or coaching since I've been a coach. And it's always like there are points that you're feeling at the top of the mountain. You feel, I've got this, I'm happy, I don't need this. But, there's ups and downs. And it's good to have someone to hold you when you are getting stressed, or you're getting in your head and getting stressed with what you have to deal. Like I found the one-to-one support incredible.
Yeah.
So is it different what you need to do for prevention versus what you need to do for recovery, or it's about the same things?
It is different. By the time you're in recovery, stress has typically been chronic for quite a long time. So there is initially more of a bias to work that looks like understanding why this has happened, lots of confidence rebuilding, lots of taking baby steps. Actually, prevention work, if people give it proper attention, is much quicker, much more strategic conversations earlier on. Because, for example, if we use me as an example, by the time I was looking at burnout recovery, I could barely get out of bed. I couldn't function as a person early days. I certainly wasn't working. So actually at that stage of things, people are typically in the medical system. There's conversations about medication, seeing a psychiatrist. It's a really difficult space to get into. So we typically, people who I'm working with at more that end of the spectrum, it's gentle work at first.
I see. Okay. So what are your options? Let's say burnout happened, you're feeling not great, not a lot of energy left to do, or motivation to do what you used to do. What are the options? You mentioned there's psychiatric help, there's medication. What else can you do? What other types of support are there that people could be considering?
Yeah, so always kind of where you're at that point, particularly if you feel like you can't cope, you can't work, definitely you need to be going to the doctor, because sometimes there can be physical things in the mix that need to be looked at here. So let's assume someone has done that side of things. They're at the point that kind of they're physically, mentally safe. Really, my biggest advice would be to work with someone who understands burnout. I think, I know I lost so much time in my recovery journey and had so many steps backwards because I was getting quite piecemeal support, and none of it was specific to burnout. So even the medical side of things, they were talking anxiety, and then it was depression. And I was like, yeah, I don't know, this doesn't necessarily feel what I'm experiencing at the moment. It's still early days for this work. So what I find to be the absolute best support for this work is you're working with someone who deeply understands burnout, and they are trained to be able to both do the moving forward conversation, which is typically more of a coaching conversation, but they've also got the skills to help you do that deeper understanding myself, exploring identity work. Because what you typically find is if you're that ambitious high achiever, you start working towards some goals with burnout recovery, you hit a block, and you need to be working with someone who can help you really understand what that block is, and start rewiring things. So on my personal journey, that's where I found things like hypnotherapy really were a game changer. It gets to the point where you know what to do, but you're not doing it, and you need to understand the why. And normally the why exists in our kind of subconscious mind. So if we think of an iceberg, conscious thinking mind is that bit above the water. Everything that drives our personality, our behaviors, our values is that bit below the water. So things like hypnotherapy can really help us rewire that side of things so we don't relapse, because we've made the shift from a long-term perspective.
Got it. I do have a comment about LinkedIn. There are some issues, I think, with LinkedIn. And if we have issues, we'll post the recording because it's being live streamed as well. We'll post the recording later. Sure. What's going on? That's what happens when you go live. Okay, what other questions do I have from my community? Actually, I think we covered everything that Vision Path cohort asked. I wanted to ask you a little bit. Yes, if someone comes to work with you, you said you do hypnotherapy. Like, what do you do? How do you support them?
Yeah. And so if we think about my one-to-one clients, it's very bespoke to where they are in terms of either prevention or recovery. But if we were to give a typical journey, it is understanding why burnout has happened, if we're at the recovery side, really doing that work around who am I? What do I want from life? It can go as deep as that. And then from that basis, moving forwards. So typically it looks like some changes to the environment, the work we're doing, life outside of work, and also work on ourselves. And the work on ourselves piece is really, really interesting because you get the insights around these are the factors that have contributed to burnout, but actually I don't want to change all of that about myself. So it's becoming really aware around what are those traits that I want to continue? Okay, what responsibilities do I have then? What are those high performance habits that are going to make that okay? So actually it's safe to be a high achiever. And then what does that mean for my work environment? Because if I want to keep this element of myself, what are going to be those work environmental factors that ideally we want to change? So again, it's going to be safe and sustainable to operate like that for the long term. So these are really, really deep conversations, but they're brilliant as well. So the majority of my clients, I'd say, if they are employed, have a shift in their career that even means they're enjoying where they are a lot more because they've actually done the work and know this is where I want to be. There's just some things to tweak. Other clients have completely changed careers, found what they love. I've also had clients who kind of set up businesses off the back of burnout, and business owners who've actually been able to step away from the day-to-day operations because actually in the period that they were working through burnout, the team have stepped up. The team are a lot happier. And so initially something that feels like the end of the world can actually become a complete catalyst for everything that you wanted.
I love this message of hope that this could actually be in the hindsight. Yes, it's difficult, but you can be like, this is a wake-up call. And a lot of times we say, like, initially you'll get the whispers from your body, oh, you're in the wrong path, what you're doing. And then if you don't listen for an extended time of time, you'll get like a punch. So kind of throws you to the right path. But all of this is kind of self-protection. Like, I think also your body, it will shut down. It's part of the system. Like, who was saying, my coach was saying, the hair dryer at some hotels that has the system, when it gets overheated, it will stop, right?
Yeah.
I wonder whether it's a feature, not a bug. When you are totally misaligned or really overdoing things, you'll like the system will pause. And it's a wake-up call. Okay, this is my life. I don't want to have regrets. How do I design it in the best way?
Yeah, that's a brilliant analogy. And where I think a lot of businesses miss a trick is they're not supporting their high performers to have these conversations early on. And what I typically see is where we're not working with prevention and actually we're coming in recovery, dealing with problems, quite often by that point the employee's relationship with the business is broken and they can't go back. So actually, if more businesses supported their high performers to have high performance coaching, that really is burnout prevention, and the business's bottom line will benefit so many times over.
Yes, absolutely. Because it is a systemic, a lot of that. You said it's both. It can be internal characteristics. But in the past, they would say, oh, do some yoga, rather than looking as well as the system of the companies. Like, there's recent research I was reading, a lot of the times, as in my first burnout, I was not the first to burn out in that small business. Like, we started falling like flies because it was a systemic issue that was causing the burnout. So I think if you are a business owner, you need to see the system as well if you want to prevent this from happening. and lose your high performers as well.
So true. And I do a lot of presentations for companies, and actually understanding the environmental factors is always one of those light bulb moments where companies are like, we've got our strategy wrong. We are putting all the onus on employees, resilience training, but actually it's a systemic issue. And there's never just one person who burns out. I'm yet to find an example of one lone person who's burning out. It's just that there's people at different ends, and quite often it is the highest performers who've tried to hold everything together that go first. So
what are some of the systemic changes then that after you work with corporates they implement?
Yeah, loads of different things. So it could be, for example, looking at systems of workload. So actually, have we fallen into that trap of our high performance? We're over relying on what are our reward systems, our performance management systems. What are we doing from a culture and values perspective? Do we actually have pockets of the organization that have developed unhealthy cultures where people are not having these conversations? Actually, one of the most basic things we typically do is do some work with their line managers so they know how to have these conversations. So it's not in mental health month we're talking about this stuff. It's part of the fabric of the organization that we're having these conversations to understand how people really are, what their ambitions are, and we're not just having more tactical interactions around where are we on project XYZ.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to talk about is confidence post-burnout.
Yeah,
because it is something I even found myself holding myself back, like, because I'm a creative entrepreneur. I always have ideas. I want to do this masterclass, and I want to do this program, and I want to do this, and I want to take this. And I was finding myself a lot of times holding myself back too much. Like, I will have this creative idea, and I was like, no, I don't want to overload myself. What if burnout, this horrible thing that happened in the past, happens again? And it took me a lot of work and even now in past October, I was traveling every week, and this fear didn't go away. It came up. Oh, I'm traveling every week on high stakes events. What if burnout comes again? And like, there's always, I'm still working with this fear of what if it comes again? So what are your best tips on that?
Yeah, it's super common. So just about everyone I've worked with has had to work on this sense of confidence failing, and it makes rational sense. We've had this horrible experience that our brain is associating with lots of pain and fear, so your body, your mind is going to try and protect you. What I have come to believe is any moment that we're feeling that lack of confidence is actually just an invitation to lean in and check, actually, am I taking good care of myself in this moment? So while it can feel like a fear, like a negative, it can actually be quite a healthy thing to use that as that moment just to lean in and go, actually, am I keeping on track with my high performance habits or self-care in this moment? And then the answer is typically yes or no. But yeah, that part of us that in the moment feels negative and makes us question our progress is actually helping us to stay healthy. So the more that we don't see it as this kind of horrible thing that's failure in itself that's coming up, and more actually that thing that's trying to help us, generally the energy around that shifts.
Yes. So talking about some habits, to share what has been helpful for me, I do have days in the week that are meeting free. And I've written a book about meetings. I'm very passionate about this topic of having fewer meetings, because there is a correlation of too many meetings and burnout, by the way, as well, when I was researching the book. So even every week having meeting free days, I have Wednesdays and Fridays that are meeting free, because I know I can no matter how intense the other 3 days, because when you're in meetings, you're performing, there's some added stress, whatever work meetings you have, right? And then have also going through the school calendar, having every 6 weeks some empty space as well. So spaciousness, it's my, again, insurance policy, that no matter how, because I do get intense, I'm passionate about my work. So this is like the framework. But then what I realized is that for me, what causes burnout is doing work I don't enjoy, resisting the work I'm doing, or getting into fear too much in my head. What if it doesn't go well? Like it's my thinking, right? So, and coaching myself or working with my coaches on those things, not resisting reality, not managing the stress, and not scaring myself out about what's going to happen. These kind of things are equally as important as actually the time off I've built in the system. What do you think as an expert?
Sounds like you're very self-aware in terms of what are the triggers for you, and then what are the systems that you have in place that keep you on track. And that's the importance with this work. It's actually a deep knowing of yourself without judgment, without beating yourself up, and giving yourself permission to have that support system that keeps you on track. I always love to use the analogy of athletes. It's completely we see it as completely normal that they have a coach, that they prioritize sleep, rest, great nutrition. We see that as that kind of essential part of getting up there on the Olympic medal stand. Yet when it comes to business people, suddenly we expect ourselves to be like machines, to perform at these levels consistently without taking care of ourselves. And you're absolutely right. If you look at brain scans of people who've been in continuous meetings without breaks, it's doing some nasty stuff. So yes, you might be kind of patting yourself on the back going, I've got through my meetings. But actually, from a performance perspective, we are far more high performing if we do have breaks, and we do take our needs seriously and meet them first. But still, I think culturally, there is this sense of, I don't know, when we're in the workplace, other things have to come before our needs, but it really works well for the long term.
Exactly. And there's this thing, and I want to invite our live audience, if you can type any questions, now is the time. And there's this thing, when you mentioned it a few times, we put other people's need before our needs. And I remember when I first became a coach, I read about this compassion fatigue. I didn't even know it was a thing. And we have parents, carers, when you're caring for older parents. We have people that are in helping professions. They are in a very high risk as well, right? Because they're so putting other people's needs often beyond themselves.
Yeah, definitely. So teachers, medical professionals, it actually makes me quite emotional if you think about, you've got those people who deeply care about the work that they do, but they're in systems that make it near impossible for them to take care of their patients, the children who are learning in the way that they want to. There's lots of blocks to them doing a great job. And actually, in the absence of those people having the right ecosystem of support around them, gradually over time, they get to the point that they burn out. There's nothing left to give because they have given everything, versus actually having a system, an environment, like some of my more startup scale up clients have, where they get the fact that to perform sustainably, to have a serious business for the long term, they have to make sure that they've got a culture where people know that meeting their needs, taking great care of themselves, is the most essential part of the job. Because without that foundation, it's going to come falling down at some point. But it's such a mental shift. And it's something, even though I'm 5 years on from burnout now, I still have to remind myself that I've got to put my oxygen mask on first. But yeah, you can absolutely change that.
And even as a leader, I'm hiring someone this week and I'm interviewing people. And I've seen people saying, I will be available 24/7. Or I'll ask people, okay, what's the cover when you're on holiday? And say, I don't take holiday. And as a leader, aware, I'm like, no, this is not sustainable. It's so common, and in different cultures it's even more, right? Especially in the freelancing market of, I don't take holidays. I'll be available for you 24/7. People working in different time zones. And as a leader, I have to say, no, this is not sustainable. Like I have to take care of them, even if because I'm seeing, you're on a way of not sustainable performance here with those beliefs. Okay, we have a question. in your life how you practice self-compassion.
Such a good question. I was on a journey with this. So I guess if I use myself as an example here, in the run up to burnout, my self-dialogue, self-talk was so negative. And I see this a lot with my clients. We're in a difficult situation and we're making it 100 times harder by beating ourselves up about how we're not doing enough, not good enough. We're a failure when burnout hits. So actually, a big part of burnout prevention and recovery is actually learning to love ourselves and know that we're enough and being our biggest cheerleaders. And it can be such a shift for people, particularly if you've grown up in an environment, a school system that has been very focused on performance and weaknesses and not having any weaknesses. I don't know if people have seen the series on Netflix, the kind of dance mums environment as well, that there can be so many reasons in life where we've developed patterns of being really hard on ourselves, and it only makes everything a lot more difficult. So how I do that now is I did a huge amount of work on myself, supported around that, actually shifting to loving myself, meeting my needs first, putting on my oxygen mask first. And now, rather than say if something goes wrong, rather than beating myself up, it's the energy now is more, okay, what is the lesson in this? How can I take really good care of myself, given that it's been a difficult day? And this is the piece where I've found hypnotherapy has been really helpful to me and my clients, because there can be so many reasons why we've got hardwired to not have compassion for ourselves. And it's almost that, if anyone is familiar with affirmations, hypnotherapy is almost like affirmations on steroids when we're coming to changes in habits, mindset, thinking patterns.
Yeah. We have a follow-up question. Can you put some daily life examples, like on a day-to-day? I assume it's for the self-compassion. So hypnotherapy, I think it's a good one because you're working on a subconscious level. So, okay, working with a hypnotherapist is one. In the day-to-day practice.
So stuff I do. So I've learned with myself how I start and end my day is a huge part of taking great care of myself, having compassion for myself. So I used to be up at 4:45 a.m, glug down coffee, go to the gym, be at my desk for super early time. I thought that was essential. Now, I guess how I show compassion to myself is I've learned that I need some time in the morning to actually gather my thoughts, be in charge of my day, tap into my needs. So that now looks for me like I have a dog. I go for a walk in the woods or a park in the morning and in the evening. And it just gives me that opportunity to tap into what's going on mentally and physically for me. So I'm always in tune with that and able to make adjustments, versus the version of me who was up at the crack of dawn, straight into work. There was no concept of me and my needs in life at that point. So, but actually the most important thing is doing the work to understand what self-compassion looks like for you. So I'll always recommend some form of one-on-one work with that. It tends to be the most effective.
Hearing you, it makes me think we know what we need to do. And even if we listen to our bodies and ourselves, I know what I need. I know when I need a massage, or when I need to walk in the nature, or when I need to laugh with a friend, or when I need to have a nap, or when I need to, move my body and dance. Like, we know, like, none of our audience here doesn't know what really helps them thrive. I think we know that. So it's the deeper belief, am I worth it? Is my worth non-conditional to performance, to external results, to other people's opinions? Like, we know what our body needs and what our inner soul needs. It's just we are not providing it. Either it's, from my experience with clients, it's either a worthiness issue, or we're so crippled by fear that if I allow myself to enjoy a leisurely walk in the morning, my performance is going to drop, and then catastrophizing and scaring myself. Like my coach said, you draw a monster and then you scare yourself with your drawing. Like, I mean, I'm going to end up homeless on the street because my business is going to feel, you see, I think the deeper issue is allowing ourselves to enjoy those things. And it's usually either a worthiness thing that we attach on external opinions or milestones, or we're just thinking and scaring ourselves out of doing that. Something horrible will happen if we let ourselves do less and be more.
Yeah, exactly. What I found is I just built all of these rules for kind of how life had to be, how I had to work. And actually, part of this for me was just questioning all of those things. Can I prove it? What happens if I don't? One of the things I enjoy to do now, which is just so not the person I used to be, is experiment sometimes with how little I can do and what happens. And just over the years, I've built more and more evidence that actually the more that I meet my needs first, the more I'm doing work that lights me up, and is in alignment, the more successful I'm going to be. And actually, there is now no real correlation with many of the things that I thought I had to do to be successful. And that in itself is another thing to unpick. What is success? Like, I had one version of success that didn't go so well.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's the work I'm passionate about on the vision work, right? Yes. So I'm looking, if you have any questions, put them in. On that, Emma, if people want to find you, I know you produce so much great content. If people want to work with you for professional recovery, tell us a little bit more information about where people can find you.
Yeah, so my website is defeatburnout.com. Got lots of blogs there, details of my one-on-one coaching. I am probably most active on Instagram stories. I'm at Emma Matthiews _coaching, do a bit of TikTok under that as well. I would say if you've been listening today and this resonates, you'd love to do some work one-on-one or in a group basis, drop me an email at emma@defeatburnout.com and I can point you in the direction for the best resources based on where you are at. What I find with this work is, although there is that tendency to want kind of step-by-steps of this is what I do, actually, when we do this work, right, it is understanding yourself and what you want. And that can be really big topics to go into. But once you've done it, it is foundational work that just sets you on a path that maybe at one point you didn't even realize was possible. One of the things I absolutely love the most is kind of the messages I get from previous clients. And they're like, I'm doing this now. Oh my goodness, celebrating this. So yeah, just know that everything is possible out the other side of burnout, but it takes active work and commitment and investing in yourself to get there, but it's all possible.
From my experience, I think the motivation you needed on prevention, like once you're in the burn, I remember when I was burned, I was hiring 2 or 3 people. I was like, please get me out of this. But I think it's also on the prevention side, or making sure that the changes are long term and you don't relapse. I think it's just great. Any last tips you want to give to our audience on prevention and recovery? What would you want them to take away from this session?
Take it seriously. So if you're at the stage that you're getting whispers, now is the time to do something about it. Also, if you're that person who is sat listening and thinking it will never happen to me, again, you're the person who needs to have some conversations right now, because five and a bit years ago, I would have thought, I'm fine. Don't have anything to talk about. Sometimes there can be this perception that we need this kind of big life-changing goal or a problem before we get support. Actually, if you identify with being that high achiever who's got big goals, I'd really recommend getting some coaching and mentorship support, because actually with the foundations that you have in your personality, when you have that structure around you that helps you ask bigger questions, helps you reset, you're absolutely unstoppable.
Great. And I'd like to leave our audience with what you said about burnout. Although it's not pleasant, it can be such a trigger for your best life yet, for a more aligned life. Like, we just came here to live this experience, and it just lets you let go of all these layers or all this weight you were carrying of people's expectations, of ego-driven goals. Going back to the other idea I've been talking about recently, it can be life-changing for the better. And on the other side of the recovery of burnout, you might be thankful of this happened, and it helped me align, live a life like more soul-led, right? This is what I enjoy doing. I allow myself to have a lot more pleasure in it, a lot more real success versus other people's definitions of success. So yeah,
I
think
that.
With that note, thank you very much for joining us. I hope you found that helpful, and see you next time. Take care. Thank you, Emma.